Welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about border tensions between China and India. The standoff, which also involves the Kingdom of Bhutan, began last month. Let's get back to our panel right now. Sourabh, here we have two countries. These are now world powers. Both countries, huge economies. Of course, they also share a very long border. But is there enough in their relationship, especially when we look at their economic relationship, their trade relationship, is there enough there to overcome this kind of dispute that we're seeing right now?
Yes, there's enough to overcome this kind of dispute. But that is not so much in their economic and trade relationship as much in their regional and multilateral relationship. They have a very close meeting on minds on many, many global issues and on some regional issues, on regional issues beyond Asia-Pacific. In the Asia-Pacific, they have areas of differences. But there's enough in that relationship, and the heads of state meet very frequently every year at various fora that they can stabilize that relationship. So the way I see this happening, I think this is going to be a very serious, long drawn-out affair on the border, but they will immunize their contacts at the multilateral level in terms of their global governance issues, in terms of BRICS-related issues from these bilateral issues. But the bilateral relationship will suffer.
Song, what are views on this? How do these two countries manage these differences looking ahead? As Sourabh says, this could be a long-running dispute. How do they resolve it sooner?
I don't think this will escalate in a further kind of serious manner. And as I talk to Chinese friends and also Indian friends here in Washington, both sides were telling me that this dispute finally will be solved through diplomatic negotiation. And as Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, was saying, after 1962, in the last 5 decades, there was no shot was fired between these two countries along the border. And the two countries all agree that this border issue finally will be solved through diplomacy. And before that, we need to keep the status quo. We need to keep the border to be peaceful. And more importantly, we need to move ahead. We need to work on other aspects of China-India relationship. And I think this issue will continue, but both sides have no intention for escalation, and this issue finally will be solved.
Sadanand, do you think there is a realization on the parts of both countries that we have too much at stake here to let this drag down this relationship?
Yeah, I don't think either country is looking for escalation. And I would echo Song's comments over here. I think that in the end, good sense and maturity is going to prevail. But at the same time, you can't sort of get away from the fact that this is, this particular incident may be a pinprick, but it's part of a pattern. There has been a downturn in China-India relations, and I would say that, in many ways, that this is a symptom of sort of larger issues. And I think what the two countries sort of need to do is re-engage. It's good that they have these very high-level meetings and come to terms with the basics. Why is it that they've had a very strongly growing trade relationship and no conflict on the border in a military sense for many decades? It's because there are shared interests, and I think they're both going to have to come to that. I think that at the end you're going to have to return to some kind of status quo, but the question is, what is that status quo? If we go back to a situation where China and Bhutan are disputing this piece of territory, but there is no building going on it, I think that is a status quo that everyone can be comfortable with. If, as the other panelist in Beijing suggests, that this is going to continue to be an issue where the military-grade road building is part of something that is pushed by Beijing, then I think that this is just going to remain a sore point.
Right. Victor, both countries, both India and China, of course, are in the BRICS group. That's a very important international group. India's Prime Minister, in fact, is expected in China at the beginning of September for a very important summit, the BRICS summit that's going to be taking place there. When you look at the broader relationship between these two countries, what are the major challenges that they face, and of course, opportunities as well?
Well, I personally hope peace will prevail between China and India, and both our two countries and 1.4 billion people here in China, close to about 1.3 billion people in India, can engage in economic development and get all the benefits of peace and good neighborly relations between the two countries. However, in this particular case, involving the Indian intrusion into this particular region, there will be a limit to Chinese patience. And I can assure you that if the Indian side refuses to withdraw from the Chinese territory, war may break out. And if we follow the Indian logic, then does that mean that China has the right to send its troops to the Indian-occupied Kashmir because the Pakistani side does not feel comfortable with whatever India is doing in the Indian-controlled Kashmir? I think the Indian government need to wake up to the reality and become more rational, because if any country would accept the Indian rationality in this particular case, there will be chaos throughout the world, and there will be no reason to expect peace and stability to prevail in that part of the world or in any other part of the world.
Right, talking about peace and stability, Sourabh, what is the long-term outlook for relations between these two countries? India's foreign minister recently pointed out in a speech in Singapore that this is a time of uncertainty in many parts of the world, and that a good relationship between China and India is needed for stability.
Yes, and he has been saying that since the beginning of this year, especially after Donald Trump was elected into office. I know the Foreign Secretary likes to frame the India-China relationship from this broad perspective. And he is obviously a very influential decision maker in Delhi, but he is not the top decision maker on this issue in Delhi. And the people who do take decisions on this probably outvote him on this decision and have a harsher view of things. And so he has been able to project a future for India-China relations which is more positive than, frankly, it is at this point of time. And that is purely because I don't think he necessarily wins the policy battles on India-China relations within the establishment in Delhi, and he would rather, he would prefer to co-opt their views and still be an influential policymaker. I think he's also auditioning himself to become the next national security advisor when he will get to make these decisions on India-China, and he takes a much more dovish or a much more enlightened view of the India-China relationship and might pull it back to a more sensible route.
All right, Song, President Xi Jinping and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, they've met several times. Most recently, they met at the G20 in Hamburg in Germany. How important is it for both these leaders to develop some kind of solid personal relationship when it comes to diffusing these kinds of tensions?
I think we need to acknowledge that China-India relationship is very much complicated. We have tremendous common interest. We have a bright future for economic and trade relationship and other common interest in different areas. But we also have a lot of disputes on different issues, like India was hoping China will support its membership in this nuclear supply group, and India was asking China to help on counter-terrorism issue and other issues. And also China is feeling sometimes uncomfortable to see that too much close cooperation between India and America in the last 1 or 2 years. So I think when the major leaders, President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi, meet, they will overcome their domestic sentiment against each other, and they will see from more strategic point of view and move the relationship forward.
You want to say something? Sorry.
Something small. I think at the end of the day, Indian troops need to be out of there. Even United States does not incur defense obligations on territories where its allies do not hold effective jurisdiction. India has gone there trying to support Bhutan in a place where Bhutan themselves don't hold effective jurisdiction. India has gone one step really too far, and it needs to find a way to get its troops back on this side of the border and get the Chinese and the Bhutanese to discuss this issue. The Bhutanese themselves have made this claim to that area as late as 2000, very late in the day. So they themselves know they really don't have much of a claim to that area. So I think these facts need to be taken into account, and India needs to find a way to get its troops out of there and out of there quickly.
What is your view on that?
I think finally China and India have a bigger stake on this, and they know they cannot afford for a serious confrontation, and this will be solved in a peaceful way.
Okay, let's leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.